The autumn rain hammered against the towering glass buildings of downtown Manhattan. Marcus Wellington, a 58-year-old real estate mogul worth over $200 million, walked with purpose through the crowded streets. His tailored Italian suit was flawless, his watch worth more than most people earned in a year. He was the kind of man who moved through the world untouched, separated from the chaos of ordinary life by wealth and power. As he approached the entrance to his favorite restaurant, something made him pause. A woman sat huddled under a cardboard overhang beside the subway entrance. She wore layers of tattered clothing, her face obscured by matted hair and dirt. Beside her sat two children, a boy of about 7 and a girl no older than 5. They were shivering, their small hands reaching into a plastic cup where someone had placed a few coins. The sight would have been invisible to Marcus on any other day. The homeless were part of the urban landscape he learned decades ago. But this time, something stopped them. The woman lifted her head slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her profile. There was something in the shape of her face, the way her chin curved, the familiar gesture as she brushed hair from her forehead. His heart stumbled in his chest. Impossible. It couldn't be. He moved closer, his expensive leather shoes splashing in puddles. The woman felt his presence and looked up. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, long enough for recognition to crack across her face like a fault line, and she quickly looked away, her entire body going rigid with fear. It was her. After 23 years, it was unmistakably her. Sarah. His voice was barely above a whisper, swallowed by the sound of traffic and rain. The woman didn't respond. She turned away from him, gathering the children closer to her chest in a protective gesture. Marcus stood there, rain dripping from his hair, his mind racing through decades of carefully buried memories. Sarah Chen, his former fiancée, the woman he'd been engaged to marry before his father had offered him an ultimatum that changed everything. Marcus didn't go to the restaurant. Instead, he spent the next hour watching from across the street, hidden under the awning of a closed shop. He watched as Sarah tried to comfort the hungry children. He watched as she refused help from a passing social worker. He watched as night fell as she pulled the children closer, whispering things he couldn't hear. By 9 o'clock, as the city's homeless drifted toward shelters and darker corners, Marcus made his decision. He approached her again, this time with a different strategy. He didn't speak to her directly. Instead, he approached the children. "Hey, kids," he said gently, crouching down. "Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes grew wide. The girl looked to her mother for permission. Sarah's entire body had gone rigid again, her jaw clenched so hard Marcus could see the muscle working. "What do you want?" Her voice was rough, unused to being heard. "If you were police, I am not police," Marcus said quietly. "I want to help." "We don't need your help," Sarah said, but her daughter was already crying softly, and they both knew it was a lie. Marcus made arrangements, a hotel room for the night, warm meals for the children. Sarah resisted at first, but when her son's stomach growled loudly enough for everyone to hear, she reluctantly accepted. She made only one condition: that the children be fed and cared for properly, and that she would never need to speak to him alone. But Marcus had plans that had nothing to do with her wishes. That night, after the children were sleeping in the hotel room he booked, Marcus sat in the adjacent suite and made a phone call. He contacted his private investigator, someone he used for corporate espionage and merger research. He had a name and a timeline. He needed to know where Sarah had been for the past 23 years. The answer, when it came 3 days later, was deeply disturbing. Sarah Chen had not simply disappeared from his life. The investigation revealed a far more sinister narrative. After Marcus had broken their engagement following his father's ultimatum to choose between sorrow and inheriting the family empire, Sarah had spiraled. She had turned to drugs. By the age of 30, she'd been arrested 17 times for prostitution and drug possession. But then, mysteriously, the arrest stopped. For 8 years, there was no record of her at all. No employment, no legal documents, nothing. Then, suddenly, she reappeared in the system. She had 2 children registered to her name. Like here was where the story became deeply troubling. The birth records for both children listed Marcus Wellington as the father. Marcus's blood ran cold as he reviewed the documents, the datas, the locations. It was impossible. He had no memory of it, and then it hit him. There was a gap in his own memory. A 3-month period in his life, approximately 24 years ago, that he had lost a substance abuse problem he rarely discussed. A period he had checked himself into rehabilitation to overcome. A period before his business really took off. A period during which he'd been in Manhattan, lost in a haze, barely remembering anything. The investigator's report included something else: hospital records from 15 years ago. Sarah had attempted suicide. She'd been hospitalized for 3 months. During her stay, the children had been placed in foster care. When she was released, she retrieved them, but her life had continued its downward spiral. Evictions, assault charges from an abusive boyfriend, a final restraining order filed against a man named Derek Sullivan, a dealer who had physically abused her when she called in to pay her debts. After that, she simply vanished from the formal records until Marcus found her under that subway in transit 3 days ago. The children, his children, he had 2 children he'd never known about, living on the streets of Manhattan. Marcus moved carefully. He arranged for temporary custody of the children through legal channels, claiming humanitarian concerns and offering financial assistance to the Social Services Department. He placed Sarah and the children in a nicer apartment, paid for 3 months in advance, ensured there was food and heat and basic necessities. Sarah accepted his help with the wariness of a woman who had learned never to trust kindness. It took 2 weeks for him to finally confront her alone. He had arranged for a babysitter, a trusted caregiver, to watch the children while he and Sarah sat in the small kitchen of the apartment he'd rented for her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. 23 years. You had children, my children, and you said nothing. Sarah's hands trembled as she wrapped them around a mug of coffee. She stared into it as if it might contain answers. You left me, she finally said, her voice thin and papery. You chose your money over me. Your father gave you the choice, and you didn't even hesitate, Marcos. Not even for a second. Sarah, I was pregnant when you broke the engagement, she continued, her eyes finally rising to meet his. You didn't know it yet, but I was. When I found out, I thought you might come back, that you'd realize you'd made a mistake, but you didn't. You disappeared into your business deals and your new life. Marcos felt the weight of her words like stones in his chest. I had a son, Sarah said. Little Marcos. After you, I thought maybe if you knew. She trailed off, and Marcos felt a chill run down his spine. Thought if I knew what? He asked. Sarah sat down her cup with deliberate care. When she looked at him again, there was something broken and hollow in her eyes. I killed him, she said simply. When he was 6 months old. I was high. I fell asleep with him on the couch. He suffocated in the pillows. I woke up and he was gone. Marcos couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt. He didn't call for help. Sarah continued, her voice emotional, as if she were recounting someone else's story. I panicked. I buried him in the woods outside the city. I never reported it. I never told anyone. I just pretended he never existed, and that I had other children. I told myself this teen would be different. This teen I would be better. Sarah, my God, Dante, she said coldly. Dante, look at me like that, like you were the victim. You made your choice. You chose money and power and respectability over me. And I was so angry at you, Marcos. I was so angry that I did terrible things. Marcos stood up from the table, unable to sit still anymore. He paced the small kitchen, his mind fragmenting under the weight of what she did just confessed. Why are you telling this now? He demanded. Why not run? Why accept my help? Because I am tired, Sarah said simply. Because I've been living in hell for 23 years, and I don't know how to do it anymore. Because I wanted you to know what your abandonment cost. Not just Marcos, but little Marcos. He never had a chance because you chose your empire over me. Marcos turned to her. What do you want? Money. More money. I want you to confess, Sarah said, and now there was steel in her voice. I want you to turn yourself into the police. I want you to admit that you fathered children and abandoned them. I want you to face consequences. Real consequences. Not the kind where rich men write checks and move on with their lives. For what? Marcos said incredulously. For what crime? He didn't kill anyone, Sarah. You did. Didn't you? Sarah leaned forward, and her smile was terrifying. You killed him just as surely as I did. You killed all of us. We died when you chose that money, Marcos. And if you had been there, if you had been the father you should have been, maybe little Marcos would still be alive. Maybe I would never have become this. Marcos stared at her, and something in her expression shifted. The pain fell away, replaced by something colder. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. There's something else you should know, Sarah said quietly. The children sleeping in the next room. The ones you've been feeding and clothing and planning to help. The boy and the girl. Marcos' stomach dropped. What about them? They were not mean, Sarah said. Not really. I took them from a social services facility 3 years ago. I've been traveling with them, living with them, using them. They make people feel sympathy for me, so they give me money, so I could survive. The revelation hit Marcos like a physical blow. The girl, Sarah continued, she is the daughter of a family from Brooklyn. She was taken during a custody dispute. The boy belongs to a grandmother in the Bronx who has been searching for him for years. They have open cases. Missing person reports. Marcos staggered backward. You were lying. Amy, Sarah's smile widened. There is only one way to find out, isn't it there? Go to the police. Tell them everything. Tell them how you've been harboring what they call kidnapping victims. Tell them how you've been giving money to a woman with no legal custody. Tell them how you've been hiding the truth about Yulu's children out. You wanted this, Marcos whispered. You wanted to trap me. I wanted justice, Sarah said coldly. Not for me. For little Marcos. For everyone you've destroyed with your indifference and your money. I wanted you to feel what it is like to lose everything. What followed was a nightmare of bureaucratic horror. When Marcos called the police, intending to explain and protect the children, he found himself instead facing accusations of kidnapping, exploitation, and fraud. Sarah disappeared from the apartment the moment the officers arrived, leaving behind only a note that read, "Check the news." The real story is about to break. By the next morning, the story had exploded across every major outlet. Billionaire real estate mogul accused of harboring kidnapped children. Marcos Wellington is the charitable facade hides dark conspiracy. The narrative that emerged was devastatingly distorted from anything approaching the truth. News outlets, not knowing what Sarah had orchestrated, painted a picture of Marcos as a predator using his wealth to exploit vulnerable children. The two children, though returned to their rightful guardians, would carry the trauma of their teen with Sarah for the rest of their lives. The girl screamed when anyone tried to approach her. The boy had stopped speaking entirely. Both had been neglected, malnourished, and psychologically damaged by years of instability and manipulation. Marcos' empire crumbled. Business partners abandoned them. Investors fled. His reputation, built over 3 decades of ruthless efficiency, was obliterated in 72 hours. Lawsuits multiplied, criminal charges were filed. His attorneys advised him to prepare for a trial that could result in significant prison time. He made attempts to contact Sarah, to force her to testify to what she'd actually done, but she had vanished completely. There was no trace of her. It was as if she had evaporated into the city she'd lived in as a ghost for so long. Weeks later, a video surfaced on social media. It showed Sarah sitting in an abandoned apartment, speaking directly to the camera. She described her life, her pain, her rage. She described how Marcos had destroyed her, how she had lost their child, how she had constructed this elaborate revenge over the course of 3 years, befriending other homeless people, stealing children from the system, planning every detail to bring them down. He chose money over love, she said into the camera, her voice steady and terrifyingly clear. So I took his money, his reputation, and his freedom. He'll spend the rest of his life fighting charges he can't defend against, living in the prison I built for him. And the beautiful part is that no one will ever believe him. Everyone will believe that the rich man preyed on the vulnerable. Because that's the story they want to believe. The video was watched by millions before it was taken down. By then, the damage was absolute. 18 months later, Marcus Wellington sat in a small apartment in Newark, New Jersey, a man legally forbidden from accessing his own assets due to frozen accounts and active litigation. The empire he had built was being dismantled by court order. He had lost his home, his business, his freedom. The criminal charges were eventually dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the civil lawsuits continued. His lawyers estimated he would spend the next decade in courts fighting claims he couldn't fully refute because the truth was so deeply obscured by Sarah's careful manipulation. He never found Sarah. The authorities searched for her, but she had disappeared into the same homeless underground she had emerged from, leaving only devastation in her wake. The real tragedy was that the innocent children, the boy and the girl who had been stolen from their families, remained traumatized and broken, not because of Marcus's actions, but because they had been instruments of revenge in a game orchestrated by a woman they would likely never understand. In her careful planning, Sarah had achieved something far more sophisticated than simple revenge. She had weaponized his own wealth and position against him, using society's biases and assumptions to construct a narrative that destroyed him as completely as if she had fired a gun. And on nights when Marcus sat in his small apartment, looking out at the dark streets, he understood something terrifying: she might have won. Because even if he proved his innocence, the world would never believe him. The story was too perfect, too emotionally satisfying. The rich man had finally gotten what he deserved. That was the narrative people would cling to forever. Justice, he had learned it, had nothing to do with truth.